Long before Japan became the global superpower it is today, its roots were planted in ancient times, in a land full of myths, legends, and rich traditions. The story of Japan begins not with warriors or emperors, but with the ancient gods who shaped the very land itself. In the beginning, Japan was nothing but an endless expanse of ocean, until the gods descended from the heavens to create the islands. According to Japanese mythology, the first gods, Izanagi and Izanami, stood on the floating bridge of heaven and, using a jeweled spear, stirred the waters, creating the Japanese archipelago. This divine creation story marks the birth of a nation, one that would soon be defined by its unique culture and unyielding spirit. The early inhabitants of Japan, known as the Jomon people, are believed to have settled on the islands as far back as 14,000 BCE. These early settlers lived in harmony with nature, crafting intricate pottery and creating elaborate burial sites. Their lifestyle was simple, yet deeply connected to the environment, and their arts and crafts still resonate today as symbols of Japan's enduring cultural heritage. As centuries passed, a new group of settlers, known as the Yayoi people, arrived, bringing with them the knowledge of rice cultivation and metalworking. The Yayoi people marked a turning point in Japan's history as they began to form more complex societies. The use of iron tools and weapons gave rise to the first agricultural communities, and the foundations of a new civilization began to take shape. The Yayoi period was followed by the rise of the Yamato clan, which is often regarded as the first ruling family of Japan. The Yamato clan's claim to power was strengthened by its supposed divine descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu. This connection to the divine not only legitimized their rule, but also played a key role in shaping Japan's national identity, blending religious belief with political power. During the early centuries of the Common Era, Japan's social structure began to take shape. The emperor, considered a living deity, was at the top of this hierarchy, followed by a growing class of warriors, farmers, and artisans. Over time, the influence of the emperor expanded, and the court in the capital city of Nara became a hub of culture and governance. But even as Japan began to stabilize, the seeds of conflict were being sown. The introduction of Buddhism to Japan during the 6th century would have a profound impact on the country's development. At first, Buddhism was met with resistance from traditional Shinto practitioners, who saw the new religion as a foreign influence. Yet over time, Buddhism gained a strong foothold, and the two belief systems began to coexist, shaping Japan's spiritual landscape. The Nara period, 710 to 794, saw Japan's first permanent capital established, modeled after the Chinese imperial system. This period marked a time of consolidation and stability as Japan adopted Chinese culture, writing systems, and governmental structures. During this time, the Buddhist religion flourished, with the construction of grand temples such as Todaiji in Nara, a symbol of Japan's growing cultural and religious diversity. But with the rise of Buddhism came tensions. The imperial family struggled to maintain control over the growing power of Buddhist monks, who were wielding significant influence in the political realm. This period of internal conflict set the stage for Japan's next chapter, an era of feudalism that would shape the country for centuries to come. As Japan entered the 9th century, its political landscape was rapidly changing. The Nara period gave way to the Heian period, 794 to 1 185, during which Japan's culture and art began to flourish. The capital was moved to Heian, present-day Kyoto, and it became the center of Japanese politics, culture, and intellectual life. The Heian period marked a golden age in Japanese history, with the imperial court and the aristocracy at the forefront of social life. However, despite the apparent prosperity, the imperial family's control over the country was weakening. A system of military governance, or samurai rule, began to take root in the land. The growing power of the samurai class, initially tasked with protecting the land and the elite, gradually shifted the balance of power from the emperor to regional military leaders. By the end of the 12th century, Japan was embroiled in a fierce struggle for control between two powerful families, the Taira and the Minamoto. These two clans clashed in a brutal series of battles known as the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, a conflict that would change the course of Japanese history forever. The Minamoto clan, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo, emerged victorious from the war, and in 1292, Yoritomo was granted the title of shogun by the emperor. This marked the beginning of the Kamakura shogunate, Japan's first military government. The emperor's authority remained, but the real power was now in the hands of the shogunate, which would rule Japan for centuries. Under the Kamakura shogunate, the samurai became the dominant force in Japanese society. Their code of honor, known as Bushido, emphasized loyalty, courage, and self-discipline, and it became the guiding principle of the samurai class. The samurai not only served as warriors, but also as administrators, overseeing lands and ensuring the enforcement of law and order. The Kamakura period was marked by a series of internal and external conflicts. The most notable external challenge came in the form of the Mongol invasions. In 1274 and 1281, the Mongols, under the leadership of Kublai Khan, attempted to invade Japan. In both instances, the samurai, aided by fierce storms known as kamikaze or divine winds, managed to repel the invaders. These victories became legendary, further solidifying the samurai's status as Japan's protectors. However, the success of the samurai did not guarantee stability. By the 14th century, Japan was plunged into a period of civil strife, known as the Nanboku-cho period, 1336 to 1392. The Ashikaga shogunate, which had risen to power after the fall of the Kamakura shogunate, was unable to maintain control over the country, leading to a fragmentation of political power. Regional lords, or daimyo, vied for control, and Japan descended into a series of local conflicts that would continue for over a century. Amidst this chaos, a new class of warrior emerged: the Ronin. These masterless samurai, often unemployed and disillusioned, wandered the land, offering their services to the highest bidder. The rise of the Ronin reflected the deep instability in Japan during this time. It also foreshadowed the coming of a new era, one in which a few powerful daimyo would eventually unite the country under a single banner. As the 15th century drew to a close, Japan was embroiled in one of its most turbulent periods, the Sengoku period, also known as the Warring States period, 1467 to 1603. This era of constant warfare and political instability would shape the course of Japan's future, leading to the rise of some of the most legendary figures in its history. The country was divided into competing feudal domains, each ruled by a powerful daimyo, or warlord. These warlords, once loyal to the shogunate, now vied for dominance in a brutal struggle for control. At the heart of the Sengoku period's chaos was the Onin War, 1467 to 1477, a conflict that began as a dispute over imperial succession but quickly escalated into a nationwide civil war. The war left Kyoto, the capital, in ruins, and the central authority of the Ashikaga shogunate effectively collapsed. What followed was a century of fragmented power, where hundreds of warlords controlled their territories, often engaging in bloody battles for control over land and resources. In the midst of this chaos, three men would emerge as the dominant figures of the Sengoku period: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. These three warlords are often referred to as the three unifiers of Japan, and their efforts to bring unity to the country would transform Japan forever. Oda Nobunaga, the first of the three, was a ruthless and innovative leader. Rising from a relatively small domain in Owari, he quickly expanded his influence by employing new military tactics, including the use of firearms, which had been introduced to Japan by the Portuguese in the mid-16th century. Nobunaga's military genius and his ability to forge strategic alliances enabled him to defeat many of his rivals. By 1568, he had seized control of Kyoto and was recognized as the de facto ruler of Japan. Nobunaga's reign, however, was cut short. In 1582, he was betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, who launched a surprise attack on his camp. Nobunaga, trapped and surrounded, chose to commit seppuku, or ritual suicide, rather than be captured. His death left Japan in a state of uncertainty, but it also opened the door for his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, to take up the mantle of unification. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a peasant who had risen through the ranks to become one of Japan's most powerful warlords, continued Nobunaga's work of consolidating power. Hideyoshi was a master of diplomacy and military strategy, and by 1590, he had successfully brought most of Japan under his control. He implemented sweeping reforms, including land surveys, the construction of castles, and the distribution of weapons, all of which solidified his rule. Hideyoshi even attempted to expand Japan's influence abroad, launching 2 invasions of Korea in the late 16th century. However, these campaigns were disastrous and ultimately failed. Despite his many achievements, Hideyoshi's death in 1598 left a power vacuum in Japan. His infant son, Toyotomi Hideyori, was too young to rule, and this opened the door for the final unifier of Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu had been a loyal retainer of both Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, but his political acumen and patience allowed him to outmaneuver his rivals. In 1600, Ieyasu faced his greatest challenge at the Battle of Sekigahara, a decisive conflict that would determine the future of Japan. The battle was a clash between the forces loyal to Ieyasu and those who supported the Toyotomi family. Ieyasu's forces emerged victorious, and in 1603, he was appointed shogun by the emperor, effectively establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. The Tokugawa shogunate would go on to rule Japan for the next 250 years, bringing a period of relative peace and stability to the country. However, the Sengoku period's legacy of military prowess, ambition, and betrayal would never be forgotten. The era of the warlords had come to an end, and Japan's unification under a single ruler was complete. But this was only the beginning of a new chapter in Japan's long and complex history. Following Tokugawa Ieyasu's victory at the Battle of Sekigahara, Japan entered a period of unprecedented stability under the Tokugawa shogunate. This new era, known as the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, was marked by peace, isolation, and a flourishing of culture and society. The Tokugawa shogunate, based in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, ruled with a firm hand, maintaining control over the feudal lords, or daimyo, through a system of checks and balances designed to prevent rebellion. One of the Tokugawa shogunate's most notable policies was its strict isolationist stance. The sakoku, or closed country policy, effectively sealed Japan off from the rest of the world for over 2 centuries. Foreign trade was heavily restricted, with the Dutch and the Chinese being the only nations allowed limited access to Japanese ports. Christianity was banned, and missionaries were expelled, as the shogunate feared that foreign influences could destabilize the country. While Japan's political and economic structure remained largely unchanged during the Edo period, the isolationist policy allowed Japanese culture to develop in unique and remarkable ways. This was the time of the flourishing of the samurai, who continued to serve as the country's warrior class, though their role was now more symbolic than practical. The samurai were no longer fighting on battlefields, but instead played important roles in governance, administration, and cultural life. The merchant class, or konin, began to rise in prominence during this period, as the peace brought by the Tokugawa shogunate allowed for economic growth. Commerce and trade flourished, and urban centers like Ado, Osaka, and Kyoto became bustling metropolises. This led to the emergence of a vibrant consumer culture, with new forms of entertainment, art, and literature becoming popular. The Edo period saw the rise of ukiyo-e, or woodblock printing, a revolutionary art form that depicted scenes from everyday life, landscapes, and historical events. Artists like Katsushika Hokusai and Utagawa Hiroshige produced iconic works that are still celebrated today. Kabuki theater also gained widespread popularity, offering lively performances that entertained the masses with dramatic storytelling, colorful costumes, and music. During this time, literature flourished as well, with the development of new genres like the popular novel. Writers such as Ihara Saikaku and Matsuo Basho, the master of haiku poetry, captured the essence of Japanese life, spirituality, and nature in their works. The period also saw the rise of the distinct Japanese aesthetic, influenced by Zen Buddhism and Confucianism, which emphasized simplicity, tranquility, and a deep connection to the natural world. Despite the period's relative peace and prosperity, the Tokugawa shogunate faced challenges. Social unrest occasionally flared up, with peasants and lower classes rebelling against the strict class system and oppressive taxes. The shogunate also faced pressure from Western powers, particularly the United States, which was eager to establish trade relations with Japan. In the mid-19th century, the arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's black ships in 1853 forced Japan to open its ports to the outside world. Perry's arrival was a turning point in Japanese history. The shogunate, weakened by internal corruption and external pressures, had no choice but to sign the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854, which ended Japan's period of isolation and opened up the country to foreign trade. The arrival of Western influence marked the beginning of a new era for Japan, one that would challenge its centuries-old traditions and ultimately set the stage for its transformation into a modern, industrial power. The Tokugawa shogunate, unable to cope with the forces of change, was overthrown in 1868, and the Meiji Restoration was born. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked the end of over 2 centuries of Tokugawa rule and began a transformative period in Japanese history. The restoration was not merely the overthrow of a shogunate, it was the start of an ambitious effort to modernize and industrialize Japan, turning it from a feudal society into a global power. The new emperor, Meiji, who was only 15 years old at the time, assumed power and initiated a series of sweeping reforms that would change Japan forever. The first priority of the Meiji government was to restore imperial authority and consolidate power. To achieve this, the samurai, who had once been the ruling class under the Tokugawa shogunate, were disbanded. The samurai's privileges were stripped away, and their status in society was diminished. The shogunate's feudal system was dismantled, and Japan's political structure was reformed into a centralized, modern government. At the same time, the Meiji government recognized that in order to compete with Western powers, Japan needed to rapidly industrialize. It sent delegations abroad to study the industrial practices of countries like Britain, France, and Germany. Japan adopted many aspects of Western technology, education, and military strategies, while simultaneously preserving elements of its own culture and traditions. This blending of the old and the new was a hallmark of the Meiji era, and it propelled Japan into a period of rapid transformation. The Meiji government also embarked on ambitious infrastructure projects, building railroads, telegraph lines, and modern factories. The development of a modern economy relied heavily on state-sponsored industrialization, and the government played a key role in fostering the growth of large industrial conglomerates known as zaibatsu. These powerful, family-owned businesses, such as Mitsubishi and Sumitomo, were instrumental in driving Japan's economic growth and in making it a formidable industrial power. Education played a crucial role in Japan's modernization. The Meiji government instituted universal education, and by the late 19th century, Japan had one of the most literate populations in the world. The government also adopted Western legal systems and military techniques, building a modern army and navy capable of competing with the most powerful nations of the time. One of the most significant events during this period was Japan's victory in the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, a conflict with China over control of Korea. The war marked Japan's emergence as a regional power and signaled to the world that Japan was no longer the isolated, feudal nation it once was. Japan's success in the war also gave it control of Taiwan and laid the foundation for its growing imperial ambitions. The early 20th century saw Japan's expansion into international politics. In 1904, Japan went to war with Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, a conflict that further solidified Japan's position as a global power. Japan's victory over Russia was the first time an Asian nation had defeated a European power in the modern era, and it sent shockwaves throughout the world, proving that Japan had successfully modernized and could stand toe-to-toe with the West. In the years following the Russo-Japanese War, Japan continued to expand its influence in Asia, particularly in Korea and Manchuria. The Meiji era also saw the rise of Japanese imperialism, with Japan annexing Korea in 1910 and exerting increasing control over China and other parts of East Asia.